Okay, so we have our figure glued onto our stand, and it's pretty secure. So now I'm going to transfer it over to my painting apparatus. This one is made by Citadel. There's other companies that make them, but these are highly useful. You don't have to have one, of course, but it does help get keep the paint off your fingers. But sometimes it's a little tricky to get them in there. So you basically just get the base in between the grippers on the painting stalk, and then you can just hold this instead of the figure while you paint. So I've mentioned this before. This is a wet palette. This one's made by Army Painter. I highly recommend using a wet palette. There's other companies that make them. They're all roughly the same. This one I like in particular, but it is very useful because you can store your paint. These pieces of paper are removable. You can replace them. I probably should replace this one. So that's, one thing to consider. But I think right now I'm just going to work with what I have. You put the water in here, the foam absorbs it, and then you have much longer working times with your acrylic paints. You can even save them for a couple of days because it keeps the air out and keeps the paints moist. It's very useful though. You'll find that it keeps you from having to go through so much paint. So to start with, we're going to find a base coat to use. This color that I have on here right now is probably good for our purposes. I'm just going to add some 70% alcohol to this to get it re-moistened and thin it out, because as you listen to me in my videos, you'll find that the most important thing that I talk about quite frequently is thin paint. You want your paint to be thin enough. Obviously you don't want it to be water unless you're only using it for shading or something like that, but you definitely want thin paint. That allows you to do more coats, and it saves the sculpt so you don't get the sculpts covered up. So what I'm using here for this color is actually you can use a couple different things. So we have the Army Painter Star Wars set of paints. These are useful. They're harder to find. There are other colors that you can use that are similar. The Rebel Fatigues for these is a good base coat, but also you could go with the Tusken Raider Tan or a mixture of the two. It's up to you, but just something roughly a dark tan color is kind of what we want to use as a base coat for these particular stormtroopers. Shore troopers, I think, is what they're called. So what we want to start with is just a base coat. I'm going to move this out of frame so you're not staring at my... Do us one more favor, and I'll lay down a cloth so that we have a better view. That should be pretty good for you guys. So what we want to do is just start with a base coat. I've already cleaned this figure previously with a little bit of 70% alcohol solution just to kind of get any of the leftover factory oils and things off of it. And if your paint is thin enough, you don't really have to worry about being too thick. That's the whole point. So you just kind of get it on there any way that you can. If it seems a little too thin, that's fine. Let it dry. We'll come back for a second coat. Now, some people question my method of adding alcohol to my paint because, you would think it would dry it out too fast. But with the wet palette, it actually is water mixed with the alcohol, so it does thin the paint, but it also does help the paint dry faster to the figure, and I find that it helps the paint adhere better to the figure, so that way it's less likely to chip off if you're putting on other coats or whatever you're doing later. You want the paint to stick. So I find that using a little bit of alcohol serves many purposes. Now obviously some models and figures is not such a good idea to add too much alcohol, or any, especially with clear parts. That can cause them to crack or break. But I find with the miniature figures and most of the non-clear parts, it works great. Obviously, if you can't find alcohol, because it is a little harder to come by these days, you can buy the more expensive acrylic thinning solution, and those work as well. And if you're more comfortable using that, then that's fine. There's a lot of companies that offer acrylic thinners. So I'm just getting the initial base coat down. It is very thin, like I wanted it. I just want to get it down into all of the grooves and cracks of the sculpt. So if it's watery, that's fine. The excess will dry. Don't want to get any brush pieces in there though. Okay, so that's pretty good. We have a nice base coat, initial base coat on the figure. That's a good stopping point for now, and then we'll let that dry and we'll come back for the next steps.